All right. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Thanks for being here again this week. As usual, for those of you that are here for the first time, we're really happy to have you. For those of you that are here for not the first time, thanks for coming back again. We always appreciate it. My name's Annalie Kate. I'm the vice president here at Route Consultant. We are FedEx contractors, FedEx route brokers, and FedEx business consultants. So we're so excited to get a chance to interact with you all today and tell you a little bit about what we do here at Route Consultant, and also just engage and answer some questions on the industry. The first thing I'm going to do really quick is read a disclaimer that we have to do. So real fast, Route Consultant is not endorsed by and is not recommended by Federal Express Corporation and FedEx Ground. Route Consultant is not sponsored by, is not approved by, is not associated with, and has no connection whatsoever with Federal Express Corporation or FedEx Ground. Really, all that means is that you're not going to receive any materially non-public information here today on today's webinar, but we hope that that means that you will also still receive materially helpful information this week. So really excited to have the chance to dive in with you. We're going to cover a really relevant, timely topic here today. But also, before we do that, for those of you that are first time to the webinar, we'll clue you in on something that is a tradition here on the Route Consultant weekly webinars. So in order to ask a question during the open Q&A session later today, you have to also answer a question. So this is a big tradition that we have. We have so much fun doing this every week. And so if you'll look down at the bottom of your screen, again, if you're a first time here with us today, rather than using the chat feature, if you will use the Q&A button, that's what Danielle is going to be managing to make sure that we get through all of your questions, or at least as many as we can here today. And so in order to submit a question to that Q&A feature, you'll have to answer our question of the day. So today's question of the day is going to be around movies. So for those of you that come to these all the time, you know, we always like to talk about food, but the one other thing that I always love to talk about also is movies. I'm a big movie buff. It's super rainy and stormy here today in Nashville. And so on days like that, I love to curl up and watch like a scary movie or some sort of just kind of curl up movie in the evening. So today's question is going to be, what is your favorite obscure, maybe like B movie type film that nobody else loves, but you just can't get enough of? You know, it could be a genre or a particular film that you're just like, oh, I can't believe I'm going to admit this on a public webinar, but I love watching this movie. So you'll get to hear from me, you'll get to hear from Danielle as well, and then we'll get to hear from all of you hopefully on what your favorite obscure movie is. So just drop those into the Q&A feature along with your questions, and we will prioritize the questions that have an answer to ours. So before we dive into today's topic, we're going to talk first about the new inventory that hit the market this week. We had 12 new listings go public today on the website. So if you haven't checked out the new inventory page, please make sure you navigate over to that. Hopefully wait till the end of the webinar, but some of the stuff's going to go fast, so you may want to check it out. So real quick, we had 2 new opportunities in Saginaw, Michigan go live today. One is 7 P&D routes listed at $550. That's only 76% of revenue, strong margins, management in place. Also, that's a long-term contractor who is retiring, has some assumable truck debt. So great opportunity there in Saginaw. We also had another 15 routes go live in Saginaw listed at $1.29 million, only 80% of revenue on that one, right there in line with market, strong margins, management in place, and has assumable truck debt on that as well. So if you're up in Michigan, this is your week. In Charlotte, North Carolina, we had 6 P&D routes go live at $750. That opportunity has, again, really solid, like 18%, really strong EBITDA margins, consistent. It's really low mileage territory and just a downsize due to scale. So you'll have a current contractor still in the building there with you as a resource. Love those for first-time buyers. So check out that Charlotte opportunity. In, I don't know if I'm saying this right, but Chavis, Kentucky, we had 12 P&D routes go live at $935. Has management in place, spare trucks, has spare drivers as well. Also just an owner that's retiring, and there's actually an additional piece to that opportunity. So another set of 12 routes, that piece is listed at $550, has spare resources as well and management in place. So if you're in the Kentucky area, those could be great to look at. For line haul, we had generally in the Southeast, I can't give a specific location for confidentiality, but just inquire with our team. We had 6 dedicated solo runs listed at 4.1 million. That's got a 44% operating EBITDA on those line haul runs. That's about as high as it gets, and really only attainable in that line haul space. So check those out. Has spare tractors with really low miles on them, a lot of new vehicles. And again, just an owner that's retiring on that line haul opportunity. In Baltimore, Maryland, we had 8 P&D routes go live at 940, over a 20% operating margin, management in place, spare trucks, spare drivers. We also think this Baltimore opportunity is SBA eligible. So if you've been waiting for that right SBA opportunity, now is your chance. In Ocala, Florida, we had 2 line haul runs, and also comes with some spot work listed in that portfolio at 599. Over a 23% operating margin. They're unassigned solo runs, great way to bust into that Florida market for line haul. It's so competitive down there, but it's a good way to get your foot in the door, no doubt. In Rolla, Missouri, we had 18 P&D routes listed at 1.295. That's only 60% of revenue. Has spare vehicles, 3 managers in place already. We think that one's going to be SBA eligible too in Rolla. So it's a large opportunity. We're thinking it's going to work with scale. So check that one out in Rolla. In South Windsor, Connecticut, we had 12 P&D routes listed at just over $1 million, so $1,025,000. That opportunity may be SBA eligible as well. Strong margins, assumable truck debt, has management, and that one's super low daily miles as well in the territory, if that's something you care about. And the last 2 we had this week are down in Fort Myers, Florida, where I'm guessing or betting it's a lot sunnier down there than it is up here in Tennessee today. But in Fort Myers, we had 7 P&D routes listed at 699. It's only 73% of revenue on that one. Strong margins, also really heavy seller financing on these Fort Myers opportunity. Like I'm talking really heavy seller financing. So if you're looking for a low capital injection opportunity, check out Fort Myers. Has management in place. And then there's another piece to that business. It's 5 P&D routes, kind of that minimum entry point listed at 499, has spare vehicles. And again, really heavy seller financing available on Fort Myers. So check out those opportunities. That's what we had go live with this week. And as usual, we will have more for you to check out in the coming weeks. So today, the topic I want to cover is something that we get a ton of questions around the different individual pieces of this. And it's something I've been really wanting to take a moment and just talk through is kind of what the timeline looks like for the balance of this year. And in general, what the timeline looks like for your ability to buy or sell routes on an annual basis, how long the transactions take, how the end of the year is affected. Something happening right now is a lot of people would think it seems crazy to start talking about peak season. It's only July. It feels like we're at that halfway point in the year, but for us as Fedex contractors, the big difference is that, November and December, when we're in full swing of peak season, everything changes. It's kind of like a black hole blur that you don't even realize you're in the middle of. And so with that, it cuts the last 2 months of the year off in terms of planning and taking action around the business. So we are actually more than halfway through the year from a contractor perspective in terms of gearing up for that peak season push. So that has big implications on timelines to sell and what you should anticipate in terms of planning for either an exit or an entry. I know a lot of the clients that we work with as well are trying to strategically time acquisitions. They're hoping to be into these businesses before peak season. And so we just want to walk you through that basic timeline of what that looks like so that you know kind of where you're at, because we're definitely at that big push. On the route consultant side, we always see our busiest seasons be January and July from ramping up perspective. And then, we do the bulk of our closings actually in the next 3 months. So we've been loading all these opportunities in. People have been listing their businesses. People are finding the right ones, and everybody goes into kind of a mad dash to get it closed in the next third quarter here before peak season really kicks off. So I'm going to share a quick screen share with you guys, and then we'll talk through a couple things. I'll go back and forth here between this. So let me click this. Oops. Let me just make sure I've got my screen sharing on. Perfect. So see, tell me, can you guys see that, Brent or Danielle?
We see it.
Perfect. Thank you. So this is a very high level summary of what an overall transaction looks like from start to finish. So this is, you'll see kind of the sideways number 4, and it basically just represents the fact that on one side of that, you have the seller side that's, listing the business and ramping up to a close. And then we also, of course, independently have kind of a buyer pipeline that's working in order to bring those two together to actually take a transaction home. So this will kind of give you an overview of what the big steps of the process are. We have obviously a lot more detailed breakouts on each of these phases as we really get into it with consulting clients or customers that we're working with from a brokerage perspective. But just from a high level, here's kind of what you can expect in terms of both process and timeline. So I'm going to bounce back and forth here a little bit, but starting on this seller side of the process, there's really this kind of initial period that is a combination of getting the business listed and then actually looking for that right buyer. And so from a seller perspective, when you're looking at that listing process, there are a handful of different items that we have to collect in order to appropriately and compliantly market your business. And so that information collection process takes time. And, without fail, we get tons of calls this time in the year from contractors that see peak on the horizon approaching them. And they're thinking, you know what, we've grown so much in the last 6 months. I just don't know if I'm positioned to go all the way into peak without, scaling down a little bit, raising some capital. So it's a really common time of year for us to get that phone call. But as you think about that, looking at the overall timeline, it's going to take us a handful of weeks to be able to, one, get all the information that we need from you, and then put all that together into a pretty buttoned up marketing packet that summarizes your business, something that buyers can take to banks in order to seek external funding, and then also just kind of wrap their minds around the business in the first place. So something really important that affects that timeline is actually how quickly you can get us that information. So current contractors out there that are thinking about selling, the sooner you engage with our team and start trying to get that information to us, the better, because that will give you your best chance of still completing a sale this year. So that process usually takes us about 2 to 4 weeks. Again, it really depends on how quickly you can get that information to us. Sometimes it takes 6 months because it takes a while for you to, collect everything. But once we have everything that we need and we can complete the valuation and get your business ready for marketing and we take it live, what we typically see is that from there, it's about a 1 to 3 month process to have that business under contract. So in today's heavily seller market, what we're seeing is about a 30-day timeline. Now, pricing has a huge impact. If you shoot for the moon, it may take you a lot longer. Location has a big impact. So depending on how desirable your particular market is, some people want to live where they're going to operate the business. And so the desirability of that particular geography can absolutely have an impact on that timeline. But on average, we're seeing these businesses go under contract in about 30 to 90 days as the total kind of timeline there, again, and that's just what's typical. So as we look back over to the timeline, the next thing I want to point out is where it talks about the deal negotiation process. So this is really that exchange of trying to help a buyer get connected to a seller and ironing out the actual purchase agreement on purchasing the routes. So before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the buyer side of the process in terms of getting educated and identifying that right business. So the first step is what I have labeled here as kind of base education. Now, for those of you, again, that's new to our process, let me just make sure I'm hearing a couple things that sounds like audio. Brent, Danielle, are y'all still hearing me good on audio?
I can hear you. Yeah, you're good.
All right, I'm not sure what's going on that, but I heard a couple people post there. So maybe log out and log back in really quick and just do a reboot there. One of the big services that we offer, and I guess I'll also say this too, so this will be recorded and we'll post it to the site within about 24 to 48 hours from today. So if you do lose anything, just tune back in if it's just a Wi-Fi. Maybe you have the same rain that we have happening right now. But from a base education standpoint, there's a couple different paths that you can take. So if you haven't checked out the Fedex 101 on our website, just to get that crash course in learning the fundamentals of Fedex Ground and the language, absolutely check out the Fedex 101 course. It's totally free. It's just a way to kind of give you that base vernacular and lay that platform for being able to jump into the space. So getting through that content is kind of a non-starter to really knowing what you're looking at in terms of identifying that right business for you. But we also have a number of other ways that we can help give you kind of an upgraded experience. We offer a lot of different consulting services, some white glove packages. I won't go into that, but just engage with our team. We have 50 full-time team members here at Route Consultant that are ready and able to help and guide you through this process if you have questions. So just engage with us on the website. But once we get that base level education completed, then we really go towards searching for the right business that's going to fit your criteria. And I see this typically take pretty comparable timeline to finding the right buyer, even though, of course, this is going to be staggered as different inventory hits the market. But for that deal search process, generally we see it take about 30 to 90 days to really find that right opportunity. Now, same thing with the buyer side compared to the sellers, that this really depends on how strict your search criteria are. So some examples being, if you are only looking for your city, your neighborhood, it's going to take a lot longer to find that right opportunity. You can absolutely buy in your community, in your backyard, when those opportunities become available. That's, it's a great thing. If it's the right business, it's even more convenient if it's in your backyard. But from the broader perspective, we own our routes in 10 different states. So typically what we say is within that 5-hour driving radius is about the max of what you want to do in terms of finding that opportunity. But as you broaden or shrink that search criteria, that's going to really impact your timeline. And, sometimes it takes a year to find the right business for somebody who's really looking for, like I said, a very specific geography. SBA eligibility and certain financing parameters can expand that timeline as well, as finding those right opportunities that fit that criteria are more or less likely. So those are just kind of probably the top two limiting factors in how long it actually takes. But if you're geographically open and looking in kind of that ideal price range between $500,000 to just over $1 million, that's probably the typical price range that we see. Then it shouldn't take that long to really find a viable business. Because what I always say with these Fedex businesses is you really can't buy a bad business. You can just overpay for it, and you can buy a bad fleet. So we do a lot of work with our consulting clients on trying to make sure that they either get the right fleet or they understand the equity injection that's going to be required to get that fleet to the right tier in order to be able to effectively and profitably operate that business. So making sure that you understand those pieces. But assuming that you take those into consideration, you really can't buy a bad business, because as long as you don't overpay for it, one of the beautiful parts to the Fedex model is that Fedex is building your payment contract around your specific territory. We're going to talk more about that in a minute, but that gives you that ability to, buy routes. There's kind of this common misnomer that you need to buy metropolitan routes in, let's say the Miracle Mile or downtown Manhattan in order to get the best routes. And that's just, it's just a myth. It's not the case, because again, FedEx modifies those compensation contracts because they need the volume delivered everywhere. And so they want the contractors that are delivering in, rural Kentucky to make just as much money operating as those that are delivering in Chicago or, Palm Beach, Miami, wherever it is. So it's really an important part of the model to keep in mind. So as you gear in and find that right opportunity and then look to negotiate on that, one of the things we advise our consulting clients is to make sure that what they're doing is prepping a purchase contract with their attorneys that's ready to submit when the right deal comes along. Because as I mentioned, it is that seller's market. Like we talked about, these businesses are moving really quickly right now. So you don't want to lose out on the right opportunity because you don't have a contract ready to submit. But we typically see between that exchange and purchase contracts with buyer and seller counsel is that process is typically going to take you something in the neighborhood of about 1 to 2 weeks. And, just being able to present something quickly is really going to help give you an advantage on trying to lock that deal up. So once you get through that, the next key part of the process is that we really move into our actual Fedex approval process. And so this is something that, obviously we help extensively with, training you on how to be prepared, how to put your best foot forward in those Fedex interviews, making sure you have all the appropriate documentation at the ready when you go in for the interview. And we typically see that interview process kind of go from trying to start that process all the way to having it completed to take about 1 to 2 weeks with the terminal management. Obviously, that can vary, and especially this time of year, we're going to talk about how close the timeline is to getting something done in 2021. If you have a senior manager who's out of town or on vacation or traveling to a FedEx corporate conference, something like that, it can really add a material delay to this process. And so the more leeway you give yourself, the more likely it is that you can still close something in a healthy amount of time to stand up before you need to be in the full swing of FedEx operations for peak season. So once you get through that FedEx approval process, generally, just to have a gauge, you're looking at about 5 to 9 weeks after that approval process is complete to being able to actually close. Some of these deals can absolutely take longer than that, but the typical average transaction is going to close in about 5 to 9 weeks. And one of the biggest factors that sways this 5 to 9 week period is the negotiations process with FedEx. So we're going to talk more about that in just a minute. But what I want you to gather from this is that in that 5 to 9 weeks, that's really your chance to get set up to operate and make sure that you have all the required vendors and operational and administrative components in place. And that can all happen in that month to 1 to 2 months that happens after FedEx approves you, and you know that they want to move forward with the transaction. So kind of taking that into consideration, again, engage with us. We can help set you up with, all the required vendors that you are going to need to be successful operating. But as we think about that, that puts the total transaction timeline at about 3 to 6 months. And again, the biggest variables that can delay those timelines outside of like external financing, which, we all know, especially if you're doing SBA deals, that can certainly add some time and some hurdles, even though, ideally it takes about 90 days to do an SBA loan. So if you're working with the right knowledgeable lender, hopefully we can still get it pushed through in that 3-month window. But that's where you start to see some of those upper bounds between that 3 and 6 month time frame. But the other big thing I mentioned, we talked about, was negotiations. So I want to talk about this a little bit because we get tons of questions around the mechanics of the negotiation process and how that works. And when you're thinking about negotiations, and I guess let me just back it up a little bit and clarify, because sometimes when I say negotiations, I'm referring to a deal negotiation with a seller and trying to lock up the right business. But in this instance, I'm talking about your contract negotiations with FedEx Ground. So all FedEx contractors are annually typically negotiating an operating agreement with FedEx Ground and essentially negotiating their compensation rates for the deliveries. So what we see in most cases is if you're buying a business, you are going to come in and assume the existing operating agreement from the current contractor that owns that business. And then you will carry out that contract until the next time you're set to negotiate with FedEx Ground. It's a really standard process. It's not overly complex, but you can get support through that process too if you're going through it for the first time. But it's nothing to be overly intimidated by in that negotiations process. But what we see in transactions where you're buying what I like to call carve outs or a part of a larger operation. Right. So if a FedEx contractor, let's say they service 3 zip codes and peak season is coming down the wire, they've decided, you know what, I need to raise some capital. I need to scale down a little bit to make sure that I'm in a good situation for peak season this year. And they're going to sell off maybe 1 zip code. So they're still going to keep 2, sell off 1. That would be an example of what we refer to as a carve out. So in those situations, there's a lot of clerical, financial analysis, administrative steps that have to happen to successfully separate those 2 businesses into 2 businesses. But one of those steps is that you, as the buyer coming in, and the current contractor will both have to renegotiate new territory or new contracts for those separate territories with FedEx Ground. And so that negotiations process happens before you close. So you go through the FedEx interview process. FedEx says, hey, we feel good about this. We think that you'd be an excellent FedEx contractor. We want to move forward with the transaction. And then we're going to head into that negotiations process. And that all happens before we're set to close. So I want to give you an idea of what the rough timeline for that process should look like. And then we'll talk about some signs it's been derailed. So in the negotiations process, when you're looking at the timeline here, so you see this is just picking up where we were before you had FedEx approval. We had this 5 to 9 week back office. I said the longer term of that is typically when negotiations is involved. So we're going to pick up right here after FedEx approval. And the first step of that, once the terminal has essentially given their blessing, is that deal will go into engineering. And the engineering department within FedEx Ground will help separate that territory into the two pieces that they intend it to be after the closing takes place. And that process from the terminal kind of giving you the blessing should usually take place in about 1 to 2 weeks. There's really no big red, giant funfetti Willy Wonka moment, golden ticket where they say you're in engineering, but we want to just keep a general eye on the process and keep pressure there to get a sense of where we stand. And then from engineering, it'll take about another 1 to 2 weeks for the negotiator that's actually going to put together the revenue proposal and negotiate with you to start that process. So 2 weeks with engineering, and then about another 2 weeks to hear from that FedEx negotiator. And once you hear from that FedEx negotiator, that's when you actually go into that negotiations or proposal exchange process with the FedEx negotiator, trying to identify what contract terms FedEx is willing to pay, but you're also willing to accept. And so then in that proposal exchange process, we typically see that take about another 1 to 2 weeks of back and forth proposal exchange with the negotiator in order to come to terms on that particular contract. And so if you do the math here on kind of if everything goes perfectly, the 1-1-1 timeframe, that's going to add about 3 additional weeks to your timeline. But if things delay, and things tend to delay, or you hit any hiccups or roadblocks, or somebody's out of town or traveling, that's when you can see, the essentially additional 6 weeks on top of that traditional timeline. So just as a gauge, we would expect that to add another 3 to 6 weeks. And then we would still have about a 2 to 3 week back office process. So essentially the short case scenario here, where you have the 3 weeks plus the 2 that you need to just get administratively set up to close, is where you can land on that kind of short-term 5-week timeline. But again, as that process drags out, we would expect it to take us into those 9-week type timeframes. So that's the big implications of having the negotiations process. So again, it can add that 3 to 6 weeks. So as I said before, we're looking about 3 to 6 months of total timeline in order to go from, starting the process to actually having a successful closing. And so, bringing it back to talk in terms of timeline for where we are in the year, this is why this is kind of entering into that last big push. So as we think about seasonality in our business, FedEx Ground is typically not going to allow routes to transfer in November and December because of peak season. It's such a huge push already on the operations, on the contractors, that generally they do not want to see transitions take place during that time frame. So with that being the case, what that leaves us is, where we are now is August, September, and October would put us at that 3-month time frame. So if everything went perfectly and we closed a deal in 3 months, it needs to be started by October 1st in order to have a successful close by October 31st, right? And even October 31st is going to put some pressure on the terminal. It's going to put pressure on you as the new contractor, because that timeline to get ramped for peak season has to be expedited. And obviously, we're going to do a lot of support with you on trying to make sure that you know what you're signing up for, and that the current contractor is poised to set you up for success during peak season. But that's the typical timeline. So where we really want to be is getting started back back in July, where we are now, headed kind of still down to the wire of making sure we have that buffer to still get new deals done this year if you're trying to close in 2021. Or if you're trying to sell in 2021, this is really that best kind of last mile timeline to be able to successfully do that and still leave enough time for peak season. Now, without a doubt, every year it happens, there will be a couple like miracle deals where, the terminal is really concerned about, how large a business is, and the right, awesome, first time or experienced new operators coming to the table that wants to take over that territory. And, we'll see some that will start the process in mid to late September, and they will still close in late October, maybe even November, just as an effort to try to make sure there's enough resources in that terminal to help with peak season. So that will definitely happen, but here is a good, healthy outline of really what it's going to take and the timeline it's going to take in order to get closed before peak season. So also, just have in your mind too, for those of you that are looking at acquiring, just because you don't close before peak season does not mean that you have to wait, a really long time. Typically what we see is, we do a ton of closings the first and second weekend of January. And that really allows for people to get through peak season. And then, we do an immediate post-peak close. So it's not to rule it out that you still can't get something done at the very start of 2022, but just to give you an idea of kind of how realistic it is to still close on something this calendar year, we're definitely in that final chapter. So as you can imagine, our phones are going crazy. This is definitely our busiest season too. One other note I'll add is just a line haul distinction here is that technically the line haul businesses can still transfer during November and December. They don't see the same spike in that volume and kind of chaos, I'll say, as we do on the P&D side. So in that particular scenario, when we're dealing with the line haul deals, they actually have a blackout period at the end of August, but it's only about a 2-week blackout period. So deals need to close before that 2-week period in August, or they can pick back up right after the end of August, and those can still technically close throughout that winter season. So we're actually headed up on the doorstep of that line haul blackout period. The biggest implication there is it can add some delays. So if you're trying to get something closed for line haul and you're going to miss that kind of mid-August timeframe, it's going to take you probably a lot longer than if you can get it closed before that mid-August timeframe. So it's a little bit different for line haul, but we can again help guide you through that process. And the last thing I'll show too was just kind of a gauge. So you can see the seasonality in a 12-month cycle. So for us, this is kind of what a typical year looks like. So as I mentioned, we'll always see a big push in January right after peak season is over of contractors for transactions that started before and close right after peak season. And then we'll kind of see steady trends throughout the year. Another big spike after everything starting in January when we get that whole new push of post-peak inventory for contractors that are looking to sell. Those deals will typically close in April for ones that start in January. And then as things straggle out, you'll see a lot of late summer closings for us. And then as I expressed, we'll do the bulk of what we do over the next 3 months in that August, September, October timeframe. A few stragglers in November, and then December, your route consultant team takes all of their vacations because it's crazy the rest of the year, especially surviving what we call our peak season. It just happens a few months before your peak season as contractors does. So right now it's crazy. For those of you that also don't know, we have our annual Expo coming up at the end of this month. So that is for current contractors only, but it's the largest independent gathering of FedEx contractors. It's here at the Opryland in Nashville, Tennessee, the weekend of July 30th and 31st. It's my favorite weekend of the whole year. It's an absolute blast. So if you don't already have plans to be at the Expo, we would really love to see you for this year's Expo, especially after COVID, and a lot of people not traveling. We're expecting a massive showing this year of, thousands of FedEx contractors right here in Nashville. So I think Danielle just dropped a link into the chat feature as well. So check that out. And again, just if you still have questions after today, which I'm sure you probably have a ton, feel free to engage with us and network with our team. We're all here to help and happy to talk to you. But In the meantime, let's dive into some open Q&A questions. I'll have Danielle join me, and just as a quick recap on the question of the day, I see we already have several questions loaded in. But the question of the day today is, we've got stormy, rainy weather here, so it's a perfect day to curl up this evening and watch a good movie or scary movie or something like that. But the question today is, what is that one movie that is like cheesy B movie, maybe like, super obscure film, things like that, that nobody else loves but you, that you can always watch, and just kind of love to hear you tell that. So I'll go ahead and answer that question, and then we'll hear from Danielle. So some of you know this about me because Spencer gives me a hard time for this, but I love like all the survivalist stuff. I have no idea where this gene came from, but my favorite thing, and this is more of a genre, but I could give a couple particulars, but I love like absolutely terrible B-rated, like just awful zombie apocalypse movies. I'm totally that person. I can watch them like all night. I promise, if it is on like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, I've probably watched it no matter how terrible it is. The darkest I will go, and I won't say this is my favorite obscure one, but there's literally like a Backstreet Boys cast zombie movie where the singers from the band like do like a zombie apocalypse movie. It's horrific. But I also love Shaun of the Dead is one of my favorite kind of like quirky, silly zombie movies. But I love all things like super cheesy zombie movies. So that is that's my dark little secret. What about you, Danielle?
Interesting. Mine's kind of similar. I like the Final Destination movies because they're so bad. It's just like, no one's gonna die that way. Like someone survives and then all of a sudden a tornado just comes down and swoops them away. Like, okay, that's not realistic. That's why it's so funny.
Yeah,
they're really bad.
Those are great. I love those movies too. It really kind of ruined roller coasters for me, but I do love those movies too. So
yeah, those are fun.
That's awesome. All right. Well, let's dive in, Danielle. Take it away.
Ready? We'll start with Daniel. It's a great name, Daniel. And as far as movies, Daniel said, I wish I could share my favorite B movie, but it would scare people. So we'll take that as an answer.
It's bad. Okay.
I know. I would still like to know it.
Yeah, like at least direct message us, Daniel. We won't read it, but now you've really got me curious. So
yeah, how bad can it be?
I know, right?
All right. And his question. How much negotiation room can you expect when ironing out the details of the FedEx contract with corporate?
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as the contract goes, it's a great question, and there's really not much. So especially in the last batch of negotiations, what we typically see for our own businesses is that FedEx is really opening where they're going to be revenue wise. So we're not necessarily expecting a major change in that revenue figure. But what the more important piece is, and what you're really negotiating, is how fixed or how variable your contract is. So whether the majority of that revenue is comprised with those fixed base pieces like your weekly service charge, your apparel and brand promotions. So for the incentives for having your drivers and brand in uniform and your trucks branded. The flip side, though, is those variable components like your stop charge, your package charge, your surge charge, your fuel charge. Those are your variable components. And so, we are always pushing to negotiate as variable of a contract as we possibly can. But that's really what you're negotiating there. And ultimately, the maneuver with that variable negotiation is that you're really betting on the growth of this industry and the growth of the business to essentially exceed what FedEx is projecting. And we have not seen it fail to do that ever. So the growth has been there. So that's the bigger piece, and it's less that you're pushing for right out of the gate larger revenue figures.
Okay, thank you. Next we have Lisa. Lisa's movie is Marlboro Man. Can't say I'm familiar with that one.
Seen that? No, I've recognized the name, but I haven't seen that. So I always take notes on these so that I can go back binge these movies.
And Lisa's question, I'm going to read it because I'm not quite sure. She has a clarifying question on pay stubs. If I pay the driver's salary, do I need to put the hours they worked on their pay stubs, or do I need to keep track of their hours for my record?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so I can elaborate probably here a little bit too, just to put some context around this question. So we're in the midst of extensive conversations in the industry around wage and hour compliance on overtime and clerical requirements too, with how we're processing payroll. So I think the big question here is if she pays the driver's salary, does she also need to put hours on the pay stub? And the most important part on your pay stub, Lisa, is that you are matching your method of payment on that pay stub. So if you pay drivers an hourly wage, which very few contractors do, then you need to have hours listed on that pay stub. But since most contractors are not paying an hourly wage, they're paying typically a fixed daily wage, you need to have the appropriate unit on that pay stub. So whether it's days worked, I mean, that's typically the best, or you can even have it say units, just you can't have the word hours if you're not calculating it and paying it hourly. So that's the critical detail on that pay stub. And we're helping tons of contractors with this right now, just trying to make sure that if they get audited by Fedex Ground, that they are going to be audit compliant, and helping them clean up that clerical side. So we're heavy in the trenches on working on these right now. So it's a really important question, and hopefully that clears that up for you. And then just make sure that, you are also tracking hourly hours in a compliant hours tracking method. So there's a lot of different ways to track hours. Some are compliant, some are not compliant. So if you have kind of questions on that part, definitely still reach out to us, engage with the team, but make sure you are tracking those hours. And that then, if you are operating vehicles that are under 10,000 pounds, that you are calculating and paying overtime as required by law. So that's why we don't like the under 10,000 pound vehicles. We don't have any in our fleet, but it's important to, if you do have that, you've got to be calculating payroll in a compliant way and paying that overtime. So next.
Okay. Thank you. Next, we have Miss Emily, and I don't think this is a B-rated movie, but her movie is Sound of Music. That's a great movie.
That's a great movie.
B level?
Yes. No, that's a classic. But I think this latest generation, they don't love the older movies that have that kind of nostalgic feel. And I love those movies. So Sound of Music is a totally acceptable submission, Emily.
She says it reminds her of her grandma.
Oh.
You're right. It's definitely older, but that's a sweet choice.
It's a sweet movie.
And Miss Emily's question is, have you ever seen any buyers who failed a FedEx interview?
Yeah, absolutely. No doubt about it. So that is something that is kind of, especially I think in the last 12 months, we've actually heard this from a lot of our competitors too, kind of reaching out, just saying they're really having trouble getting people through those FedEx interviews. I personally try not to be biased, but I think this is one of the places where we're really, really strong is getting through those approvals. And I think it just comes from actually having been in so many interviews ourselves as operators. And so that in and of itself has just really helped in understanding what FedEx is looking for, and also understanding what it really takes to succeed in these businesses. So at the end of the day, that's what FedEx is looking for, is somebody that's going to succeed, because they're investing a lot and putting a lot in terms of their brand into anybody they approve. And so that's a place where we spend a lot of energy, is training and making sure that our buyers know what they're signing up for and are set up to succeed, so that they can make that great impression with FedEx. So it definitely happens. We have a really strong approval rating, but also with that is kind of part of why we do the process the way we do, to help get you educated, get you in there, and make sure that it's going to work, before you hit into the rest of the details there.
Thanks. Next, we have Craig, and his movie is The Impossible Years, and I don't know, but he explained it for us. It's a late 1960s movie about a psychiatry professor who writes books about parenting, but struggles to raise his teenage daughters.
Wow. Oh man. Okay.
Yeah. Sounds like,
yeah, I'm gonna watch that. That is, I feel for that. We make the joke in our household for parenting that it's there's nobody out there that can be a pro parenting, because nobody's done it max more than like 10 times as far as like anybody I know, but most people have only done it like 2, 3, 4 times. So it's, you know, very hard to be the expert, but I could only imagine what a psychiatrist trying to also give advice on parenting and raise kids at the same time. Oh, I think I could go down that rabbit hole probably too, Craig. So
Yeah, sounds like a good premise for a movie.
yeah.
Okay, Craig's question: does FedEx change the contract terms much from the current contract to the one of the new contract, whether a sale of the entire business or carve out?
It's a great question. So typically, no, that is really the design when the engineering process is happening and they are doing those carves to separate those individual pieces. What they're attempting to do is appropriately distribute the revenue for those two separate pieces. So typically that's not the case. Sometimes something goes wrong in the engineering, in the calculation. It also depends on I think the quality of the data you're originally provided. Like I know we have a whole team of financial analysts that do this all day long in kind of mastering these carve outs. But if you've got somebody that's just dividing, the territory by 2 and saying, great, here's your revenue, then the probability that negotiation contract comes in consistent with that number is like very low. So it also depends on the quality of the initial information that you receive, but assuming that the information you've been provided is accurate for the revenue that's been previously generated by that specific portion of the territory, then no, I would expect it to come out similar, but sometimes it doesn't. And that's when we have to kind of look at it and say, was there an issue in the engineering and the data clean, in which case we can usually reconcile that and work through that? Or is this a situation where FedEx is just kind of given the contract a haircut, in which case, that is its own conversation in that scenario, no doubt.
Haircut. Okay, next we have Hunter. Yeah, Hunter, and Hunter's movie is Roadhouse.
Oh, I love me some Patrick Swayze movies. I'm so there for Roadhouse. I haven't watched that movie in, oh my God, I don't even know, a long time, but I'm going to put that pull that out of the archive. So approved.
Okay. And Hunter's question is, what are the FedEx limitations on the number of P&D and or line haul routes a contractor can own between region or territories? If one wanted to build a larger contractor holding company, is that allowed by FedEx?
Yes, great multi-part question here, Hunter. So from a scale perspective, so kind of the minimum is you need to have at least 500 stops or 5 routes on the P&D side. You need to have at least 2 runs on the line haul side from a minimum perspective. As far as the maximum goes, so FedEx limits us to being and it varies terminal to terminal. So it's typically between about 6 and 15% of the total terminal volume within that building. So on the P&D side, 6 to 15% of the terminal volume. There is no limitation on scale in other markets, like how many markets you can be in. As I mentioned, we're in 10 different states, a lot of different terminals. But from a scale perspective, in any one terminal, you cannot exceed whatever scale limitation is set for that building. And so the difference in variation, meaning, 6% is more likely going to be in a larger facility where 6% might be a 30 route operation versus, 15% of a smaller market might be, 5 to 7 routes at 15%. So there's going to be a different scale limitation for every building. That's something you can ask the current contractor, ask the terminal to understand. It's something that we always do before we take the listing, just to make sure we understand whether that piece is viable for sale or not. And so from a scale limitation perspective, just making sure that you really want to be at or ideally below that scale limitation, just to leave yourself some room, is critical on the P&D side. And then for line haul, it is 15 runs in any district. So it's a larger geographic swath on the line haul side, but you need to be 15 runs or less in any particular district.
Okay. Thank you. Next, we have George. And George's favorite movie is A Perfect Murder with Michael Douglas.
Ooh, that's a classic too. I haven't watched that in a long time. I love Michael Douglas.
Got a list going over there.
I know, I really do. I'm writing all these because this is what with weather like this, I'll go home and binge watch these tonight, depending on when we get out of here, but I'm all for it.
That's great. And George's question, George said he's new to this presentation and he's new to the Fedex, everything. And he would like to know, does he have to work with a consultant?
No, he definitely does not have to work with a consultant. And actually, I'm sorry, going to pause because I realized that Hunter, I didn't answer the second part of Hunter's question on the holding company. Sorry, I just gapped and realized I missed that. So let me answer that, and I'll come right back to you. So as far as the holding company goes, you can have a holding company. Fedex doesn't have any policies against the holding company. We typically don't recommend a holding company, and just from a diversification standpoint, there's really no benefit to having everything inside of a larger holding company. Because ultimately you're just, you're starting to connect assets that you could otherwise keep separate. So we have literally 22 separate S corporations and have for a long time. Our accountants love us, but otherwise, there's plenty of fun that comes with that. But that's something, we talk about this in a lot of our content too, but really would recommend keeping that diversified, but you're not forbidden from having a holding company. So jumping back over to George's question, you definitely don't have to work with a consultant at all. We've kind of flooded the market with all this free content in an effort to try to help, if you're going to do it, and at least try not to get into any type of major hot water there. A lot of the rules that you need already exist out there, but you definitely don't have to, but you absolutely can. And yeah, I think it's that simple. You don't have to.
Next question is Renee, and I could possibly just answer this myself. Ms. Ailey, her favorite movie is any spaghetti Western movie.
Love it.
That's so cute. And she asked Renee asked, do we have a detailed agenda schedule for the presentations at the Expo? And I will drop a link in the chat, so please check it out. And we do have a lot of all of our presentations are wonderful. There's also a ride and drive event with an electric vehicle. It is not to be missed. Definitely come to the Expo. Anything else you want to add, Annalie? I kind of took that one over.
No, that's perfect. That's exactly right. Drop that link and check it out. Like I said, we're so excited for the Expo this year, but we would really love to see all of our current contractors there, no doubt.
Thank you. Next we have Dee Dee, and Dee Dee's movie is, I don't know how to say that.
Machete. Yeah. Machete. That's a great movie. Machete. Yeah, that's a great movie. I've watched that one, so I've probably watched that pretty recently, but I could go back and watch that. See, I told you guys I love like B movies. This was like intense. I mean, like y'all are throwing out like all the can't get over like old school, but I'm like I love them so. But
you can hear like multiple post-its over there. You
I know.
The list.
You literally hear it. Y'all should see my desk. I have like my little post-it notes up there, stuff I wanted to try.
Machete. Later you're gonna be like, wait, why did I write that down?
Yeah.
Okay, Dee Dee's question is, can you share one question that a FedEx executive might ask on an interview to a prospective buyer?
Yeah, so I mean, FedEx, let's see, I can think of a billion. I do a whole recorded training on this very topic, but I would say one that we get asked often in interviews would be to talk about contingency planning. This is a critical one. I cover a lot of this content, but from a contingency planning standpoint, they're absolutely going to want to understand what your contingency plans are on if drivers don't show up, if trucks break down, if your manager quits, if you get sick, all of those different things. So one of those kind of critical questions is really on that contingency planning scope. And, you want to have a pretty comprehensive response that you can provide to make the best impact there. But a lot of other questions like that, but that would be probably the first one that comes to my mind.
Okay. Sorry, let's go back to Christopher asked a question, but he did not answer ours, but we'll answer anyway. Christopher would like to know if it's possible to be successful as a remote operator.
Yes, absolutely. We do it every day. Yeah, as I mentioned, so Spencer, the owner of the company, when he first got started, his very first set of routes too were in Springfield, Illinois. We're down in Nashville, Tennessee. So quite a haul. In no way, shape, or form was he on site every day. Even, within the first 2 weeks, our manager quit and we were like totally starting from scratch. So it's definitely something that can be done, and there's kind of different personality types that I'd say that structure is right for, and it's about kind of understanding for you what matters most to you and how you're going to operate the business. And certainly you can kind of forfeit some of your profitability in order to build in the right infrastructure to allow for a more remote ownership. But contractors do it every day all across the country, so it's a really good mix of those that are on site going to the terminal daily and those that are remote from the operation.
We have two attendees that kind of ask the same question. So we have Daniel and TV, and TV's movies Anchorman.
Oh,
again, I think that's
my husband's favorite.
You know what Anchorman is? No, it's A-list. I don't think it's B-list.
Oh,
I think that's right. The top.
I was like, yeah,
so good.
I can, like, my husband, this is what he puts on like every day in the background, so I can basically hear Anchorman playing in my subconscious like 24/7. So
good. It's a good movie. I love that movie. And then Daniel's movie is It's a Wonderful Life.
Oh, I love that one too.
Yeah,
that's great. Here's the question, Daniel, and you got to submit. Did you watch it year round, or do you just watch it at the holiday season? That's the question. So, but we'll see what he says. But go ahead, Danielle.
We both asked if we were going to have a webinar focused on line haul. And I believe I might have an answer for that. Brent, we might have a video already on line haul that we can send a link to, because I know we've done that in the past, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We cover a lot of line haul content virtually. Our the P&D contractor network is just so much more connected, and it's so much larger. There's a lot more P&D contractors than there are line haul contractors. So sometimes on days like today we cover a lot more P&D, but I think that's a great idea, and we can definitely put that on the calendar to try to do a line haul specific session too. So I will get a sticky note for that.
I'll link the first part. We have a 3-part line haul webinar series that we did just a few months ago. It's on our YouTube channel. So I'll link the first part, and you can watch it on our channel as well there.
Awesome. Thanks, Brent.
Thanks, Brent. You know. Okay. Next we have Patrick, and Patrick, his movie is Remember the Titans. Oh, it's a good movie.
That's a great movie too. That one, it gets me every time.
And Patrick was saying, as a new line haul contractor, he is really challenged recruiting drivers. He pays top dollar, he has all new rigs and is flexible on work days, but he cannot get decent drivers to save his life. Is there any insight to recruiting for line haul?
Gosh, yeah. I wish that I had a magic wand that I could wave for this one, and some sort of totally secret, top secret solution that I could just be like, ta-da. But we would have used that one up by now, no doubt. It's really hard, in today's labor market. We talk about this, as a nation, we're incredibly short on line haul truck drivers, just simply because that's not what, as we were growing up, it's not what our parents said, hey, go, study and get a job doing this. We were encouraged to go to school and take out debt and do all that, instead of specifically focusing on trucking. And now a lot of our drivers, from a competitive wage standpoint, I hear that too, Pat, because it's a lot of our drivers are making well over 6 figures operating for us and driving full time, and even that is not competitive in a lot of markets. So I think that is a real challenge. Referrals have really been the best place we've ever found in terms of really building out that line haul pool, is like, if you can find some of those stable, reliable, loyal line haul drivers, and you can really build that deep relationship, then from a referral standpoint, I think that's probably one of the best, because, even just from them at like truck stops, they network and communicate, and they have a community as well. There's a lot of Facebook pages. Facebook can be a powerful tool from a line haul perspective, but those are about the two things that we have had any success with, outside of really just marketing them on Indeed like everybody else, and then trying to have competitive incentive structures and bonuses. But it's hard on the line haul side for sure.
Next we have Chad, and Chad's movie is Maverick.
Oh, love Maverick too. Mm-hmm. That's also, this is not a like obscure, but I always think of Tombstone too, when they say that movie. Not a
Oh.
great movie. I love Tombstone. So anyways,
That's a good one. That's a good rainy day movie.
yeah.
Okay, besides hiring a vehicle mechanic inspection and visually inspecting myself and requesting records, is there anything else that I can look for when buying a P&D route with trucks during the due diligence?
Yes. So the top things, I mean, of course, just like the vehicle inspection, as you mentioned, is a non-starter. That, you know, all of our clients, I'm going to absolutely encourage you to do that. You know, some other things that I would say in due diligence, you know, you're looking at the gas versus diesel, you're looking at the fleet size, fleet capacity, and essentially the usage of that fleet capacity. So how well they're doing at actually using up the space versus if there's additional capacity inside the vehicles is an important thing to look at in the due diligence part. I mean, mileage is really important too, and just understanding that. But I mean, those are the big things. It's not, you know, it's not rocket science, but having them inspected. And, you know, mostly, I think a lot of the work that we do is really understanding the fleet strategy and making sure that it's the right fleet for the territory, as opposed to just good trucks, because a vehicle inspection is going to tell you whether they're good trucks. And frankly, like, you know, maintenance records rarely exist or are rarely very helpful in the first place. So, you know, a physical look at the vehicle and the actual, you know, inspections are your best mechanical assessments, but strategy is also a really important part to understand too. And I know it's, I'll say this too, I know it's 4:31, Danielle, so we've already kept everybody at the full hour, but we'll stay and try to knock out a couple more questions. We still have a bunch more in here, but let's try to do 2 or 3 more questions. Danielle, and
Okay.
These two, yeah.
We have Emily again. She already answered our question.
Yeah.
So we will answer another one of hers. Is FedEx combining ground and express, therefore owning a P&D will be more attractive than ever? Is that true?
You got it. Yes. You know, we, I think we did a segment on this a couple of weeks ago too, actually, in one of our other webinars, but you're right. So yes, FedEx has announced that they are going to be integrating that express volume into the FedEx package network. And so we went through this just this past year on SmartPost was kind of a similar concept for us, in that we did a big merger with the USPS, and it was going to be bringing all this additional volume in and create all this additional influx of packages. And we absolutely saw that. We felt that. We benefited from that. You know, a lot of FedEx businesses legitimately doubled in size in the last 12 months. With the express volume integrating into the network as well, we are anticipating nothing short of a similar surge in volume growth. So just kind of continuing to watch the e-commerce boom, and we're not anticipating any slowdown in that as you know, as virtual buying and that kind of e-commerce adoption continues, and then adding express into it. I would say no doubt it's a better time than ever. Let's do one more, Danielle.
One more. We're gonna go with Mark.
Okay.
Mark's favorite movie is Silverado. Favorite rainy day.
I think that's the first movie. I don't know what Silverado is, so I think that you might have got me, Mark. So that might go to the top of the list for tonight's watch.
And Mark's question is, if I have 2 solid buyers to split my businesses, would you still recommend using your services? Would it greatly affect his timeline? Yes, Mark.
Sorry, I'm just rereading that. Yes. Yeah, I mean, we can definitely still help. I don't think it would affect the timeline per se. I guess it depends. I mean, to put it nicely like this, if what you've provided them so far is good information, it shouldn't change anything. But if, you know, if anything in the split were different based on kind of what we expected initially, that I think could open up a conversation, but I wouldn't expect that to be the case. So I don't want to, overstate there, but I don't think it would affect timeline. If anything, that's kind of one of our big, I think things that we're good at is trying to expedite these, FedEx transactions and knowing where to press with the transaction with FedEx. And how to keep things moving. And, not every deal goes that way, of course, but our overall timelines, I think, is one of our strong suits. So depending on also if your buyers are like current contractors versus new people to the industry that really don't know the space that well and are trying to learn, I really recommend that you, involve us just so that we can help make sure that, one, they're successful, because that protects you from a liability perspective. You don't want to sell to people and then have them fail. And two, just, making sure that they, again, have all the tools they need to put that best foot forward. I mean, this is what we do all day long. As I mentioned, a team of 50 over here that like eats, sleeps, and breathes FedEx ground routes and helping these things go from start to finish. So we're happy to help, but if you're far enough along in the process and you've got really experienced buyers and you feel really confident in what you've done, you can always just call and talk to one of our brokers or consultants too, just to let them kind of talk them through where you are. And once we know the specifics of your situation, we might be better positioned to give you an answer to that if you really need us or not. But I think there's definitely a case where that it could be helpful. And then there's some cases where it's like, you guys are good. So that's what I would say. So, all right. I know we didn't get to all the questions, but I appreciate all of you again being here week after week. We're so grateful and love to have this chance to get together. Hopefully we'll see a lot of you in Nashville in July. And for those of you that are prospective contractors looking to be part of the community, please engage with us, reach out, let us know what kind of questions you have. And I'll be more than happy to talk those things through with you and try to set you up for success. So thanks again, and we'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.